Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis for today. But before we do that, an important reminder. As you all know by now, Byjus Exam Prep IAS is now on Telegram. So do download the app, and if you already have the app, all that you need to do is scan this code or use the link given in the description of the video to join this group on Telegram to get all the latest current affairs updates. Also, tonight's session, that is the explained series session that goes live at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel, will be on India's new aim, that is to become a developed nation by 2047. We'll be discussing all important aspects related to this clarion call given by the Prime Minister of the country. Now let's begin with the first article, that is about inspection of the labor reforms that were recently introduced. The author here, who is a former member of the Planning Commission, writes that the intention of the labor reform might have been good, but in reality, the labor reforms introduced by the Government of India recently have not been able to actually bring a lot of good changes. He says that there is a big misconception. The labor reforms, when they were actually introduced, we had thought that by making the ease of doing business better, that is, by making it easier to conduct business, it will automatically improve the economic situation in the country. It will distribute the benefits to the laborers also, and it will overall impact the country in a very positive manner. However, that has not happened. Even today, there is huge inequality amongst the people in the country on various bases. Inequality on the basis of caste, inequality on the basis of their economic status, inequality on the basis of where they live, so on and so forth. COVID-19 pandemic in fact increased this inequality, where rich people became even richer. There are many millionaires in the country that added incredibly to their wealth during the pandemic, while lakhs and lakhs of other people lost their jobs. That is why the Government of India must take immediate steps to resolve this situation. The author also says that one big problem that we have in our country is we think just by giving an employment, just by giving a job, we will solve the problem. But that is not the case. The problem is not just employment, it is also the quality of employment. For example, let's assume there's a person who is PhD, or there's a person, let's say, who is an MBA. If that person is doing a job that is actually giving him only 12,000 rupees per month, do you think that is actually good for the society? No. He is employed, he is not without a job, but the expectation of the society from him are much higher. That is why it's not just about giving employment, it's about ensuring that proper quality employment is given. The Government of India thought that by making changes in the labor laws, we might be able to achieve that. Thus, reforms in the labor laws have started from the time of the Congress government itself. The purpose of labor reforms was not really to directly impact the labor situation. It was more to make the business easier in India. It was to attract more investment. It was to tell the companies that now you can have a much better and much easier time in conducting business in India. The government will not interfere. You will not really have to fulfill a lot of obligations and you can start doing business. Government thought that it will lead the companies to actually employing more people, but that has not happened. In fact, this article is actually based on a report given by VV Giri National Labour Institute. The title of the report is Impact Assessment Study of Labour Reforms Undertaken by the States. So the author says, since labour is a concurrent list subject, even though the Government of India introduced certain labour reforms, it depends on state to state how they have implemented it. And this report actually takes into consideration the performance of different states across the country and how the labour reforms have changed the situation in their country. The report mainly focuses on Industrial Disputes Act, the reforms that were introduced in this act. Now, let me give you a bit of an idea what kind of reforms and changes were introduced in the labor law, such as the Industrial Disputes Act. So, for example, the earlier law said that if the owners of the organization and the laborers have a dispute, now that dispute can be regarding wages, salary, holidays, etc. Usually, the trade unions actually come into the picture. They will resolve the dispute. The earlier law was that this dispute mechanism and how to resolve the dispute usually will only apply to those organizations that have at least 100 employees. So only those organizations that had at least 100 employees, they will have trade unions that will resolve the disputes. Now that minimum level has increased to 300 employees. So now if an organization has at least 300 employees, then the trade union will then come in between to resolve disputes. How does this help the companies? This helps the companies because now the companies can employ many more people without worrying that the trade unions will come and interfere in their work. So in effect, it is actually favoring the people who own the companies, not in favor of the labor as such. The report also says that the labor laws have mostly focused on making it better to invest in India. And the expectation was that since we are making it easier for the companies to actually deal with their disputes, since we are making it easier for the companies to even fire people, companies will now be ready to hire more people. That was the expectation. Because earlier the law was that in order to fire anyone or remove the person from the job, a lot of different permissions were required. Now that is not the case if you are up to 300 people only. The hope was that easy to fire means it will be easy to hire also. But that has not happened because the government has not understood that deciding how many people to hire doesn't just depend on how easy it is to fire them. It also depends on their market, if their business is expanding or not. Only and only then more people will be hired. The more people will not be hired just because you are saying that you can easily remove them from the job. Also, the report is very clear that maybe in the long run the reforms will be positive because these reforms take time to be implemented. At least right now, they don't seem to have any positive impact, but in the long run, it remains to be seen. The other problem in these reforms is that the companies that employ less than 300 people are not entitled to give social security benefits to its employees. Social security benefits, for example, can be about paid leaves, written contract, these kind of securities. However, this is a problem. Even if a company has 200 employees or 150 employees, even then they should be willing to provide bare minimum facilities because that is how the position of the labor will improve in the country. So the problem that the author is pointing out towards is that all these labor reforms are actually focused on making the life of the businessmen better and not really making the life of the laborers better. Also, there is a widening gap between the GDP and employment generation. The author says that in 1980 to 1990 era, every 1% GDP growth meant that there are 2 lakh new jobs generated in the society. From 1990 to the era of 2000, every 1% growth in the GDP led to 1 lakh more jobs. From 2000 to 2010, that fell to only 50,000 jobs. And now it seems to be going even further. That is what recently, if you saw, Raghuram Rajan said that India is in a phase of a jobless growth. Raghuram Rajan recently, just a few days back, said that India is in a phase of jobless growth. That is, we might be seeing some growth, but it is not resulting in enough job opportunities. That is what the article is saying here as well. Now, I know very well that you would not be willing to go through the entire report given by the VV Giri Institute. So I saw the report and I have taken out certain important snippets from that report so that you can actually go through them. One of the things that the report tells is the different types of labor reforms that have been introduced by making changes in the law and what are the benefits that will be derived from them. As we discussed, the Industrial Dispute Act, its application has now been increased from minimum 100 to minimum 300 people, making it easier to fire people, making it easier to reduce the labor cost in the organization. There are other laws also that have changed. For example, the Factories Act of 1948 will be applicable only in those organizations which have at least 20 people. Earlier it was 10 for those factories that run with power. The factories that run without power, for them also threshold has been increased to 40. So in short, it has become easier for the companies to hire, not to give many facilities to the laborers and actually ensure that they don't have to go to the government time and time again. One other thing that the article points out here with the help of the report, and it is clear from this table also, the government of India had hoped that improving labor reforms and making it better would increase the number of formal workers. However, that has not happened. If you actually see, the number of informal workers is almost the same. If you can see from 7 years, 8 years jump, the number of informal workers in agriculture and in non-agriculture sector has not really declined. Overall, on an average, if you see in agriculture, for example, close to 90% of people are still in an informal employment. The difference between formal and informal employment is in informal employment, you don't really have any security, you don't even have any paid holidays, you only get paid for the time that you're actually working. There is no concept of maternity or paternity leave, there are no medical benefits, so on and so forth. Also, there are some other concerns about the labor code that have been mentioned by many other people. As I said, most of this will now only apply to organizations having at least 300 workers. Now, the companies will be able to arbitrarily decide the service condition of their workers. It will give them flexibility to fire whenever they want, to dismiss less than 300 workers whenever they want. The new conditions also make it very difficult to have a strike organized. Now, in order to organize a strike, the worker would have to actually take a prior permission. Only when that permission is given by the company, the strike can be organized, which makes it almost impossible to have a legal strike organized now. Also, the implementation of these labor codes has been expanded to cover all industrial establishments for the required notice period. For a legal strike, as I said, it is very, very difficult to actually have a legal strike now. The next article that we have is on a topic that is being discussed continuously over the past few weeks. That is the debate of freebies versus welfare. We have also discussed this in the past CNAs as well. It's in the form of an article where two learned people are actually giving their views about whether freebies or welfare facilities should be allowed or not. We have discussed this earlier as well. The problem with this debate is how to define what is a freebie and what is actually welfare. If a government decides to give free electricity, is it a freebie or a welfare? On the other hand, if the other government decides to give free food, or the third government decides to give free laptop to the students or free bicycle, what will be called a freebie, what will be called welfare? Political parties obviously accuse each other, saying that our schemes are welfare while the other party's schemes are freebies. But that is where the problem lies, because there is no proper definition. The matter came to the news because of two things. Number one, Prime Minister openly said that the youth of the country should not follow the reverie culture. That is, the youth of the country should not hope for freebies. On the other hand, the Supreme Court also recently heard a petition under which the Supreme Court said that there has to be a fine balance between welfare and the loss to the public exchequer that is happening. If you look at the Constitution of India, the directive principles of the state policy say that India will be a welfare state. So it is the responsibility of the government to help the people in the lower section of the society. But then, does it actually become a vote bank method? If a political party says vote for us and then we'll give you this thing free or that thing free, how much sense does it make economically, considering that India has always been in a position where governments never have enough money for the welfare of the people? The interviews here actually say that some kind of a welfare or freebie is fine, but it cannot be a blanket policy. Blanket policy means a policy that applies to everyone. For example, if the government says that we will give you 200 units of electricity free, if it applies to every single one, then it's a blanket policy. On the other hand, if the government says we'll only give 200 units free to those households which have this level of income, or those households which are poor, then that is much, much better. That is what the authors suggest should be the plan going forward. Having a blanket policy, having a policy in which everyone is given a freebie, that doesn't make sense. Because not everyone needs or actually deserves to be given these kind of subsidies from the government side, and the government can save a lot of money. If you remember, when Modi government first came to power, we had huge subsidy bill on the LPG cylinders. The government of India, in the initial years of Modi government, started a scheme called the Give Up Subsidy Scheme, in which the government urged the people who are better off to give up their cylinder subsidy. So that was also a way to convert blanket policy into that kind of policy which is targeted. This is what the authors also support. The authors say that we focus much more on the central government's expenditure. But the reality is, if you look at the respective state governments in India, their position in terms of finances is very, very bad. This can be seen from a recent RBI report titled The State Finances in India. Most of the states are under huge debt and they don't have enough money to be spent on important activities just because they are spending too much money in terms of freebies or welfare, whatever you want to call them. However, the irony is that even though most governments in India give all these freebies, the reality is if you look in India, the welfare spending in India, welfare spending can be health, education, these kind of things. That welfare spending in India is still very, very low, even lower than some of the least developed nations in the world. For example, India's public spending on health and education some years ago was 4.7% of the GDP, while for sub Saharan African nations, some of the least developed nations in the world, their spending was close to 7%. One of the other problems that the authors here say is that we focus much more on expenditure. On the other hand, we should actually have a debate on how to improve our revenue. Yes, expenditure will only increase as the population grows, but the revenue sources should also increase. The government's income should ideally increase year after year. That will solve the problem automatically. But the issue is that that is not happening in India. Income tax base in India has remained stagnant. We don't even have 6% people who actually pay income tax in India. Not just this, countries around the world have other kinds of taxes as well. There are countries that put wealth tax, estate tax, inheritance tax, so on and so forth, but India doesn't really have that. We have property tax, but as per the authors, that is also very, very low. Yes, the fact is that many people still cry in India that we have to pay a lot of taxes, but the reality is that they are a minority. Many people in India still hide their income and don't pay any tax. As per the authors, the big problem is when you actually have to pay income tax, there are a lot of exemptions that are given in India. If you pay income tax, you would know. Now there are two ways in which you can actually pay income tax. One, if you claim exemption such as under 80C, the investment that you have made. The other is if you don't claim any exemptions. Whichever is better for you, you can choose out of the two. The problem here, as per the author, is that giving these exemptions actually gives a lot of methods to the people to find loopholes in the law, because of which people are not paying enough taxes. Only a few people in India are actually bearing the burden of each and every one. That should not be the case. We can also increase the property tax because in developing nations also and in the developed nations, property tax earns much more money for the government as compared to what it does in India. Focus also has to go back on why is it that the government is waiving loan of corporates. Why is it that the government is lowering corporate tax while at the same time the income tax and other taxes are not being lowered? The government of India has been spending on a lot of other projects that might not really be justified. Bullet trains, crores and crores of rupees on building big statues, some other infrastructure that might not really be required, but even then the government keeps on going ahead with those. The author also says that I might be criticized, but I am of the view that the government policy of giving 2 years of paid child care leave also doesn't make sense. Yes, maternity leave is fine, you should give it to the women, but to give 2 years of paid child care leave does not really make much sense, and the government should cut down on all these kind of expenditures that are a burden. One more point that I would like to add from my side is that the government can also cut down on a lot of expenditure by actually getting rid of the pensions of MPs and MLAs. Do you know if an MP or MLA, even if they serve only one term of 5 years, even then they will get a lifelong pension? So imagine if someone was a member of parliament or MLA 20 years back, 30 years back, they are still young and they are still working, even then they actually get lifelong pension. That also an added expenditure that the government should actually get rid of. Now, since this article makes a mention of Reserve Bank of India's report on state finances, I thought of just sharing with you the important pointers. The Reserve Bank of India in this latest report actually gave warning to multiple states that are in a very, very bad financial condition. Many states in India, if they were just alone and not really held by the center government, may have actually gone the way that Sri Lanka is going. But the reason why they are still stable is because they have the support of the center government. The state governments in India, as per the RBI, have been increasing their fiscal gross deficit over the past 5 or 6 years. Their market borrowings has also increased, especially in states such as Maharashtra, UP, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal. Their market borrowings has increased considerably. The main causes are farm loan waivers that many states have actually announced, interest payments from these borrowings, also the pay commission's announcement of actually increasing salary and pension, that has also been an added expenditure. Then many state governments have actually given money to the discoms, that is electricity distribution companies, who have been in a lot of losses, to revive them. All of these have made sure that the state governments in India are under a lot of financial stress themselves. The RBI has suggested that the public distribution system, the PDS, has to be made better. The state governments have to decrease their borrowings from the market and should actually respect the target set under the FRBM Act. The target of 20% set by the FRBM Act for the state level debt to GDP ratio should be achieved by 2024-25 as per the RBI. They have given rankings of different states depending upon how much stress is on the balance sheet of these states. As you can see, a lot of these states continuously offer a lot of freebies to the people living in their states. And all of these have to ensure that their finances become much, much better. The next article that we have here is about a recent controversy that happened at the central government level with respect to the Rohingyas in India. So what happened was, as you know, recently the Union Urban Development Minister actually announced on social media that the Union government will actually give houses to 1100 Rohingya migrants who are living in the slums in Delhi right now. These will be the EWS houses that have been built by the government of India. These houses will actually have good amenities so that they can live their life properly. However, soon after that, the Home Ministry actually said that no, this will not happen. Rohingyas are still illegal foreigners in India, and the places where they are living will actually be termed as detention centers only, and the government eventually will plan to deport them back to Myanmar. Now, this contradiction between the two union ministers has actually led to a big debate. The debate is that the Indian government makes different kind of claims at the international stage, but internally does not follow up on those claims. For example, the Rohingya community has been at the center of attention of the current government. The government of India's multiple ministers have actually said a lot of things against the Rohingyas. The Union Home Minister, for example, said that India would never accept the Rohingyas and we would actually send them back to Myanmar as soon as possible. In fact, the Indian government sent a Rohingya woman back to Myanmar this year, although it is against the principle of non-refoulement. The principle of non-refoulement is simple. This says that you should not send back any refugee forcefully to his or her own country if their life is in danger. So if someone's life is in danger in their own country, you should not send them back. That is the policy of non-refoulement. Now, as you know, India is not a signatory of the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees. Even then, India has been ensuring that whatever refugees come to India, we safeguard them. But again, the reality is that on paper, we are not a signatory to this UN Convention of Refugees of 1951. The article says that Rohingyas who have actually come to India evading all this violence in Myanmar should be actually safeguarded in India. This is in line with the government of India's slogan of Vasudev Kutumbakam. But on international stage, as per the author, we make different claims, but when it comes to actually implementing those claims, we have not been able to fulfill our word. India should have actually played the role of a regional leader to convince Myanmar to build home for Rohingyas within their country, but we have not been able to do so as well. So all in all, there are a lot of issues that still need to be resolved on the front of the Rohingyas. Now let's discuss a few details about the UN Refugee Convention of 1951, of which India is not a signatory. This is a primary convention that came up after the Second World War because we had a lot of refugees that were running away from their nation. This particular convention gives guidelines to the host nations, how should they treat the refugees. They also give a proper definition of what refugees are actually. They also say that people who are war criminals and are wanted in their country are not considered as refugees. The refugee would be a person who is outside his or her country of nationality, has a fear of being persecuted because of his or her own race, caste, or religion or nationality. Also, the refugee should be a person who is unable or unwilling to return and will not be protected in their own country. That is a person who will be called a refugee. There are certain rights given to the refugees under this convention. That is, the right not to be expelled forcefully from the country of their shelter, the right not to be punished for illegal entry into the country if they are coming just to safeguard their life, right to work, right to housing, education also has been given to their refugees. They also have the right to be protected from refoulement and should not be sent back to the country where their life is in danger. Now, again, reminding you, India is not a signatory to this convention, but still, over the past few decades, we have tried to fulfill as many of these obligations as possible, even without being a signatory of this convention. There are many reasons that India actually points out why India has not been a signatory of the UN Convention on Refugees. For example, we don't agree with the definition. We say that it doesn't talk about the economic rights as well, under which the person may flee his or her country. There are also concerns of national security. The people who are coming into the country illegally, how do we check their background? We are not really sure about that. India also has very open and porous borders. If you look at India's neighbor, that is why it is also concerned, because it's easy for anyone to actually enter into our country, and we don't want that to happen. Also, in a lot of northeastern states, there has been so much population coming in from outside that the local culture has actually reversed. Look at Tripura, that used to be essentially a tribal state, and now the tribals have now become a minority. It's also an added strain on the economy to ensure their health, livelihood, housing, etc. is obviously an added expenditure on the side of the government. The next article that we have here is about an interesting software that many of you would have used on your laptop or computer, that is a VLC player. Remember, the VLC player software has a logo something like this. That's a traffic signal sign, orange and white. Now, the issue is that VLC Player's website, again, not the software, but the website from which you can download it, has been banned by the government. There was no news of why it happened actually. If you go to the website, it just says a message. The website has been blocked as per the order of Ministry of Electronics and Information and Technology under the IT Act of 2000. Now, many people have filed RTIs to this ministry to ask the reason behind the ban, but no reply has been given. Now, many people thought maybe it is banned because the government banned certain Chinese apps, but the fact is that VLC is not really owned by a Chinese company. So that might also not be true. The other argument that is given is VLC itself is not a Chinese app, but there are some hacking groups in China that are misusing VLC. Because it's an open free software, anyone can download it. Many people in India and other parts of the world have also downloaded it. So hackers are using this to actually transfer malware and other kinds of problematic softwares in people's laptops. That is why the government may have banned it. Again, there is no official word from the government side. From the examination point of view, we are not really concerned with the VLC specifically. We are more concerned with what exactly is the procedure for these kind of websites or apps to be banned. Now, in India, there are two ways in which the bans can be carried out. There's an executive method and judicial method. As the name suggests, executive method means when the government gives an order. Judicial method is when the judiciary comes out and gives an order for banning this kind of a content. The power to the government to ban these contents is given under section 69A of the IT Act, that is Information Technology Act of the year 2000. Now, this section 69A allows the government to direct an intermediary. Now, intermediary means those platforms on which the data or this website has been uploaded. They can be asked to ban this data or platform if any information generated is actually against the interest of sovereignty, integrity of the country, defense of the nation. It might incite violence, so on and so forth. So it's easy. Similar kind of restrictions that have been placed under Article 19 when you talk about freedom of speech and expressions. The courts can also ban it. They also have the power. If they think that it is going against the interests of the nation, they can actually go ahead and block it. The court may also order blocking the data if it is against someone's copyright and it is actually displaying content that belongs to someone else. Now, From the government side specifically, do understand the state governments doesn't have this power. It is only central government that actually has the power to issue such an order. The state government cannot do that. Now, at the center government level, what happens is that the center government would actually have to appoint a nodal officer who will forward this complaint to a designated officer. This designated officer will be a part of the committee that will actually look into this complaint. If they think there is merit to the complaint, that is, if they think that yes, this content is bad for the country, it should actually be removed, they will then go ahead to the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. After the ministry's approval, the intermediary will be asked to remove the content. In short, the central government has a lot of powers to decide which content will actually remain online and which content will not be allowed online. And that is why the people who criticize the law have been asking for a change in the law. They have been asking for more transparency. They have been asking for the government to reveal the reason why they want a specific content to be removed. However, the rule number 16 of this law says that strict confidentiality will be maintained and the government will not tell you the reason why exactly is this content being removed. And that is why the government of India has been using this law to ban a lot of content that they don't really appreciate. Now, there's one other point of view. The other point of view is why exactly are websites such as Twitter, Facebook, why are they accepting what the government of India demands? If the government of India, for example, today says that YouTube should remove 5 channels or 10 channels, why is it that YouTube is actually accepting that demand? Why are they fearing? They are fearing because if they don't comply with the order, then it will have loss of immunity from liability of the content being hosted. Now, let me explain what exactly this is. Let's assume that I put a status on WhatsApp or Facebook because of which someone got hurt and it led to riots and someone died. Okay. Again, I put up a status on Facebook because of which someone got hurt, there were riots, people died. Now, the government says that if such kind of a status is put, should it be the responsibility of Facebook or should it be the responsibility of person who will actually put the status? Facebook would obviously say it is not my responsibility. I should not be liable. I should not be liable for whatever content is posted on my platform. The person who has posted the content, go and arrest those people. This protection to Facebook will only be given if they accept the governments of India's directions on these kind of things. If they don't accept the government of India's directions, then they will also be held accountable for each and every content that is going on their website. Imagine this from Facebook or Twitter side. Would they want to be responsible for lakhs and crores of status that everyone is putting every single day? No. So they don't want liability out of the content on their website, and for them to actually get immunity from this liability, they have to comply with whatever the government is saying. And that is what is happening in India right now. Now, I'm sure you would have seen in the news recently also the government of India asked YouTube to actually remove certain channels that were spreading anti-government and fake propaganda all around the country, and that is why they were removed. So yes, there is a legitimate need to actually ensure that we ban these kind of fake channels and fake news. There is one other very interesting data I wanted to share with you. It is not just India. Countries across the world actually keep on requesting these social media websites, online companies such as Google to remove content. This is a ranking of those nations as per how many requests that they actually made to Google last year to remove content for various reasons. Look at the leader here. Russia by far above each and every nation. Then we have Turkey and then we have India. Very close to India, we also have US, Brazil, South Korea, etc. Now over here, there is one very interesting takeaway. Number one, China is not here because China doesn't have Google. So let's not compare that. Secondly, let's not assume it is only with the developing nations. See, USA, they have much lesser population than India, but see the number of requests that USA has made is also very similar to that of India. So let's not say it's just India specific problem, or let's not assume it's just a developing nation problem. Even the developed nations have these issues. See the other nations on this list: UK, France, Germany, not the poorer nation that you might expect to find here. The next article that we have here is a directive from the Supreme Court of India to the Kasargod district management, ensuring the authorities to give proper facilities, medical facilities and other kinds of care to the endosulfan victims. Now, this is not a recent news. As you know, in certain districts of Kerala, many people have actually been suffering because of exposure to the endosulfan chemical that has been used in the agricultural fields of Kerala for many, many years. These people have gone to the courts and authorities, and the Supreme Court also in the past has asked the victims to be given compensation of rupees 5 lakh each. The Kerala government, on one hand, says that yes, we have been given this compensation, but the victims say that they have not been given the kind of health facilities that they actually require. The Supreme Court has asked the District Legal Services Authority to delegate visits to district hospitals, communities, primary healthcare centers to ensure that all these people who have been affected by the endosulfan chemical are actually taken care of. The court has been very angry with how the Kerala government has treated this issue in the past also. This is not the first time that they're asking the government to take appropriate action. In the past, the court has said right to health is an integral part of right to life under Article 21, and the government of India or the government of any other state has a responsibility to ensure proper health conditions of the people living in their state. Now, this issue of endosulfan, as I said, is not a new issue. This has been a chemical that has been in the news in various parts of the world. This is actually an insecticide that was first used in 1950s. It's also known as theodin. Theodin is a trade name by which it actually sells in the market. Now, the use of this chemical has led to multiple physical deformities, poisoning amongst the people on various scales. It is usually sprayed on crops such as cotton, cashew, fruits, teas, etc. etc. It is also listed under the Rotterdam Convention on the Prior Informed Consent and the Stockholm Convention on POP. I'm sure all of you would have read these two conventions. The Rotterdam Convention simply says that if a specific country, let's say by ship, India is transporting these kind of chemicals to some other nation, so that if something wrong happens, they are ready to actually solve that particular issue. That is the Rotterdam Convention. It is about prior information to be given to the nations about the hazardous chemicals being transported. Then we also have the Stockholm Convention of 2001 that aims to reduce the concentration of POP, that is persistent organic pollutants, that remain in the atmosphere for very, very long time. This endosulfan has been listed in both of these conventions. As you can see, the implications of using endosulfan in Kerala have been very, very bad. It has been in use since the 1970s when it was sprayed on agricultural fields across the state in various districts, including the Kasaragod district. These implications are usually seen in the bodies of the human beings long after these chemicals have been used. In fact, this also passes from generation to generations, and that is why a lot of help is needed by the people who are actually affected by this. These are the important articles on the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. There needs to be a fine balance between national security and freedom of speech. Elaborate in the context of IT Act of 2000. Second, is there merit in the idea of setting up a commission to ensure efficient use of public finances in India? Critically analyze. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead. Have a very, very happy Shri Krishna Janmashtami as well.